Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff, and this is the HockeyDebates.com podcast. We come to you twice a week to talk all things hockey, even when we're in the midst of a pandemic, when there's not a whole lot of hockey to talk about. But, you know, in recent days, there's been sort of an increased drumbeat about what may happen in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and I thought it may be time to start talking about the competition a little bit because it looks like we're going to play. So our special guest is Brian Hedger, the beat writer for the Columbus Blue Jackets for the Columbus Dispatch. And this is the guy who's wired in, obviously, about the Blue Jackets. Welcome to the program, Brian.
Good to see both of you guys. Good to see both of your faces.
Yeah,
kind of weird, you know. We don't get to interact with any of the media anymore, right? We're all at our homes.
Yeah, and I'm fearful that could be commonplace. That who knows what's going to happen after. We may be doing all interviews by Zoom for all I know. But anyway, Brian, before we talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about the competition. Let's start with probably the most pressing issue: is what do you know about Seth Jones? I mean, this delay, in theory, could help the Blue Jackets.
Well, Seth is back to skating. He's been skating for several weeks now, actually. I mean, he got injured. Boy, my memory. It was in February, I think, and it was a ankle fracture. He also had like a high ankle sprain to go with it. So he ended up having him and Oliver Bjorkstrand both. They both ended up getting the same exact injury. I don't know if it was the same ankle, but it was the same exact injury. But separated by about 4 or 5 weeks, and they both had this surgical procedure it's called a tight roping procedure, where basically football players have been having this recently, especially Alabama football players, most notably Tagovailoa, I believe I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
Just drafted. Like it helps promote the healing process faster. With like a high ankle sprain, and they also had he had a fracture, so they had to go in there and kind of like put screws in and do this tight roping procedure, but it helped. And then the pandemic hit, right? Like as far as them stopping play. And so he's ready to go, as far as I know. I mean, if they were to start training camp tomorrow, he'd be ready to go. Like he'd be ready to skate with the team. I believe Oliver Bjorkstrand would as well. I'm going to be doing a story on for Saturday updating injuries, but pretty much all their injuries. Then they had a lot of them. But the only one that really is maybe a question mark at this point, as far as maybe he will play or won't play, would be Josh Anderson, who had a major shoulder surgery, shortly before the pandemic pause. So, the prognosis for him was like maybe he would be ready to kind of start doing off-season stuff in July, potentially, weightlifting, things like that. I mean, if he's going to weightlift, he's going to do things like that. Hold on here. I'm going to have a beagle that's going to be barking right behind me.
Yeah, well, my dogs are behind me.
Oh, God, they're insane. Sorry about that.
Well, by you getting them to be quiet, my dogs who are right behind me, who would have started barking.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Yes. That's what it is. It's like whenever a dog goes by our house or at the pond nearby, they go absolutely ballistic. But anyway, getting back to the hockey with Josh Anderson, I think is going to be the only real question mark. So that means they're going to get back, if it were to have a restart and all that kind of stuff, we're looking at July is what everyone's talking about, possibly them starting up again. I mean, they could have Seth Jones. They could have, Oliver Bjorkstrand. They could have Cam Atkinson back. They could have, those are 3 big ones right there, right? Pretty much their whole, they were missing about half their roster. Dean Kukan, a guy no one ever really talks about, but he was actually in their top 6 defensemen. He had a really major kind of if you're going to have a major knee sprain, he had that, but he's back. Like, he's ready to roll. I think he's skating again. So they had a number of guys hurt, and I think they're going to be back, and they'll be at almost full strength, and they will be at full strength if Josh Anderson can play.
Now, they were, obviously one of the hottest teams in the league at the time this all came apart. Is that, I guess we don't know because everybody's kind of in the same boat, but certainly with the way the Blue Jackets were rolling, I'm sure they were the last team that wanted to see the season shut down because it looked like they were developing into a team that was going to be a real dangerous threat in the playoffs.
Yeah. When we were going into when the pandemic stopped or the pause hit, that day they actually had a really big game scheduled against the Pittsburgh Penguins, rivalry game. Penguins are ahead of them in the standings. When the season stopped, the Jackets were actually in the second wild card for the Eastern Conference by a point, I believe. I think they have 81. The Islanders have 80. I think they have 80. And the Islanders have 2 less games played. So that's kind of like that big deal. Whereas if they were just that was the big concern here, was if they were going to come straight back into a playoff and not be a 24-team playoff or a 20-team playoff, they're just going to come back in and go straight to 16. How are they going to do that? Was it going to be a point percentage thing? So if it was point percentage, they would have been out, and the Islanders would have been in. So I think that's one of those hangups. I know for a fact that Jarmo Kekalainen is lobbying, to his fellow general managers and governors, for those bubble teams to kind of play it out and make sure that you have a chance to play for the Stanley Cup if you were right on the verge there. So yeah, they were disappointed, when the season ended, or season stopped, because they were kind of on a roll. They had just gotten Jonas Korpisalo, goalie, back from a long injury. So they had both him and Merslakens, who both played really well this year. So they had them both back finally, and they were ready for a stretch run. Just coming out, they came off of we had just come back from the Western Canada swing, and it went pretty well. They won in Vancouver. They're coming back, and they're looking forward to trying beat the Penguins, and then the season paused.
Brian, you talked about the goaltenders. That's my next question. When with both guys healthy, what do you think happens the rest of the way? And what does this mean for the future? They signed them both. They have them locked up. Could we see a tandem? Or as one GM suggested to me around the league, he wouldn't be shocked if somebody gets traded just because, both those goalies are pretty desirable.
Well, I think kind of fostering the trade talk potentially is not just those two. They also have another, a top prospect that they really, really like. His name is Daniil Tarasov, who's about 21 years old. He played outside of Russia for the first time this year professionally. They had him go to Finland, and he played there. Had a pretty good season. Not great, but as far as statistics, but he's young. So they really like Daniil Tarasov. Then they also have another guy who was a rookie this year in Cleveland, Vaini Vehviläinen. And it's not easy to say or spell. Another Finnish guy. But he dominated the Finnish league for about 2 years before this past season. When I say dominated, we're talking like a 1 point whatever low number GAA, and the save percentage was real high, especially in the playoffs. So he was really impressive. He's not short, but he's not like your 6'3", 6'4" typical kind of guy. He's only about 6'1", 6'2", but they like him a lot. He stops a lot of pucks, and so he was in Cleveland. So they are deep in goaltending. They had another kid come up this year when Korpisalo got hurt. Is another Latvian guy named Matīs Kivlenieks. And Matisse actually played pretty well and almost shut out the Rangers in his NHL debut at Madison Square Garden. So, and he's big. He's like 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", athletic. Seems to be kind of like the body style they like outside of Vehviläinen. But they're deep in goalies. So that may be where that kind of talk comes from, where they look at the organization and say, maybe one of those top two guys gets moved somewhere for something that they need. Now, that's not what Jarmo's saying. Jarmo Kekalainen, the general manager, is saying, he signed those two guys for a reason. He thinks they both proved at separate points in this season that they can be the guy. They can be a number one, each one of them. And so they are sort of looking at a tandem. I think if you look at the salaries for what each was signed, Elvis had a little bit more of a, as Yarmo put it, he had a better argument in like an arbitration type of situation. So he got a higher salary. And I think if you really kind of boil it down, you look at him as probably the number one right now. And, Corpy would be like the 1A, which is, it's really kind of it's like a Wally Pipp situation for Corpy because he was so good. I mean, it's hard to describe how good he really was. And then he gets injured in a really controversial play on December 29th at Nationwide Arena where it was like replay that screwed up the time and everything, and it goes to a shootout and he gets hurt in the shootout. Well, that creates an opportunity for Merzlikins to play regularly, and Merzlikins, I mean, he just responded really well. As soon as he was given the opportunity to play regular minutes, he dominated. So now you got two guys. So that's my question going forward is, it's one thing to say you have a tandem, and that's great. And I think you'd rather have that than not. But how do you keep them both sharp? How do you play them both enough to keep them sharp when both of them want the net? They both want the net. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. But I guess you'd rather have two guys who can really stop the puck than none. Is
there any goalie in the organization that we can all pronounce?
That's a toughie. You know what? They have another guy. They have another guy who's real big, and another big body guy, and he's at North Dakota, and his name is Peter Tomei, like Jim Tomei. So that's kind of easy.
Yeah.
Compared to Veini Vaivalainen, it's a little easier than that.
Well, speaking of weird names, sadly during these shutdown of all sports, I've been covering a lot of Russian table tennis. And there is a top Russian table tennis player named Merzlikins. So Elvis might have a brother who's a great table tennis player. You might want to check with him when he gets back.
He does have a brother. I know that. He does have a brother who's Latvian. I don't know if he's a table tennis player, though. I'll have to ask him. I'll have to check on that.
I was talking this past week to a professional skating coach who works with a lot of NHL players. And, of course, she's been working closely with them during this weird situation where they can't get on the ice. And she says they're just absolutely freaking out because none of these guys ever go more than a day or two without getting on the ice on their skates. Are we looking at a situation when, supposing they do come back, where it's just anybody's game? Like, do we throw the form charts out the window and it's just whoever gets, kind of gets back on track the quickest is going to be the team that wins the cup?
That's kind of what it feels like to me. I mean, I feel the same exact way. I also talked to a skating coach about a month and a half ago. Same scenario. She's over in not New Brunswick or Halifax area, but yeah, I mean it's the same kind of thing. Like they're all going to come back. Nobody's skating right now. I mean everyone's doing their own thing at home, trying to stay in shape, and I'm sure you can do that to a certain extent, and these guys are. And I'm sure some of them probably have shooting ranges and everything else, like in their basements or whatever. I know Nick Foligno has a full like a workout gym basically in his house that he's been using. And I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're a professional athlete and you have the means to do it, I'd put one in too. But no one has a full skating rink at their house, so you're right. I mean, it's a great point. When they come back, it's just going to be a kind of a free-for-all to see which teams can get accustomed to their style of play and be, physically conditioned, in a skating sense. I think that's who's going to determine, who wins the cup if they come back.
It used to be you couldn't talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets without talking about Dubinsky, and he hasn't even come up. Has there been any news at all about Dubinsky? I mean, he obviously has not played. And
no, whenever his name gets brought up to Jarmo Kekalainen, he immediately talks about how he has a serious wrist injury and how it's or I should say a chronic wrist injury, chronic pain. And it sounds for all the world like we're not going to see Brandon Dubinsky again. I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, I'm not going to, that's just my feeling. I'm not saying that for sure, like I'm informed or anything, but every time you ask about that situation, that's kind of the answer that comes up. So it's really starting to look like one of those situations here where, in certain markets, they'll have guys on long-term injured reserve, LTIR. Now they have not used LTIR with Dubinsky yet. They haven't had to. I mean, their cap situation was perfectly fine. But if it gets to a point where they have to sign Dubois, I mean, he's coming up, he's going to be a restricted free agent this offseason, whenever the offseason happens. Anderson, do they keep him? Do they trade him? If they keep him, it's going to be a big pay raise probably. So all those things kind of get factored in there. Is he an LTIR candidate, Dubinsky? We don't know that yet. A couple people did stories. I know Aaron Portline did a couple stories this season. I've tried to get a hold of Brandon, and I haven't been able to get a hold of him. And I think it's one of those situations where you kind of have to go through him and not the team right now. And I don't know how that whole situation is going to shake out, but it doesn't look like, at least for this season, for sure, they are not counting on him coming back.
Well, Brian, we're running out of time, but we appreciate you coming on. I mean, I think I look at that Blue Jackets team, and it kind of reminds me of those Devils teams of the 90s where you'd say things like, if they get into playoffs, they could win it.
Right.
They're built for postseason. They're hard to play against. Tortorella is the right kind of coach for that. And now with everybody healthy, boy, I'm sure of all the teams in the league that would like to go right to the playoffs, it's the Blue Jackets, because you wouldn't want to risk, going in and having something happen and, fall out, then go right to 16 because, the 2 games in hand. So,
right. Well, and we saw it last year too, with them sweeping the Lightning, and nobody saw that coming, including yours truly here. I didn't see that coming, but they did. I mean, they didn't see the sweep, but they saw that they could compete with those guys, and it turned into a sweep. And I think that series, when I look back on it, I did a whole kind of retrospective oral history on it last month over about 2 weeks' time. And as I put that together, I started realizing that team and the holdovers from it. Yes, they lost Bob Bobrovsky, they lost Panarin, they lost Duchesne, all these guys they lost. They didn't lose Nick Foligno, Cam Atkinson, like all these other guys who were part of that sweep, who are like integral parts of that sweep. And those guys learned from it that, hey, we can do stuff if, we can do this even without those other guys. We can do this if we play this style that Torts wants us to play, and we frustrate people through the neutral zone. And that's exactly, I think that's what has gotten them to this point in this season, was their belief in themselves and what they can do, but also that system that they played against Tampa Bay, where they keep 3 guys high and they kind of, muck things up through the neutral zone. So yeah, put them in the playoff scenario right now with a healthy team that's willing to play that way. I'd take my chances with them.
Yeah, I would too. Well, thanks for joining us, Brian. I hope to have you on later as we get into the playoffs, and we'll see what these Blue Jackets can do. Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot, Brian.
Cool. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
Yeah, see you later. That's Brian Hedger, who is the beat writer for the Columbus Dispatch for the Blue Jackets. And Bob, you brought it up first, just about how hot that team was. And, I look at the record, 33, 22, and 15 for a team that was beset by injuries. And, if you're looking for a dark horse, like I wouldn't list them among the favorites, but if you're looking for that team that can make a surprising run, the Blue Jackets might be that team.
And it seems like that's almost the way to go, because if they do play, none of these teams have played in 2 months, and it'll be longer than that by the time they actually get back on the ice to play games. So it is almost like a whole new season. And, it's going to be whoever gets out of the gate the fastest, really. And, just because, will younger teams be better off than older teams because, their guys, bounce back quicker than an older player who's been off the ice for 2-3 months. There's so many unknowns here that it's really difficult to peg a team and say that's the team to beat, because so many factors are involved in this that have never been involved before.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about, what they should do. And, I said right from the beginning that, even if all we got was a single elimination 31 team tournament, I'd take that because no matter what we do, and you just pointed out, just there is going to be kind of an asterisk on this season because it's not the same as we normally do it. There's going to be an emphasis on things that usually there are no emphasis. Usually by now, teams are well established, they're hot or they're not hot. And now everybody's starting in cold, and it's going to come down to depth. It's going to come down to who had workout facilities in their home, as Brian was alluding to with the players and all that kind of stuff. So, and everybody's got an opinion. Sidney Crosby has said that he favors the 24 team playoff, which basically just allows you to work in the bubbles. And my feeling on that. I think the bubble teams should get their shot because in a parity league like the NHL, it's not like the 24th team is that far off from the 10th team in the league. The difference between the Coyotes being in or out, or the difference between the Coyotes winning that division or being out of the playoffs is a goalie injury. Actually, 2 goalie injuries, and so for that reason, it makes sense. Like, Gary Bettman calls it, preserving the integrity of the season, and I just call it being fair. So, but there's 2 ways of doing it. I mean, if you have a 24 or even a 20 team. I would prefer the 24, but then you're being fair because the last 7 teams in the league, they weren't going to get in anyway. But if you got 24, you've pretty much covered it all. Or if you just play out the regular season, either way.
There was an interesting development yesterday, with everyone assuming this is going to happen. Bobby Orr was on TSN. And I don't know if you got to see this in the U.S., but Bobby Orr was pretty adamant that he doesn't think this is a good idea. He thinks this is putting players in jeopardy, not only of catching COVID, but of suffering a serious injury because they haven't played for so long. And, to have them go right under the intensity of playoff games with really little preparation for it. He thinks this is a recipe for disaster. And does a voice like Bobby Orr still resonate at this point, or is people just going to say, yeah, it's some old guy who doesn't get it?
Well, I think it does. Bobby Orr's voice does resonate, but I'm not sure that's going to. There must be an animal on my deck because my dogs are going nuts. But I don't know that it's enough to prevent this from happening. I think the fact that there's a presumption that a healthy athlete is going to defeat this, even if he caught it, and statistically that's certainly true. I think that enters into it. I think that the fact that I think the NHL financially needs to play, I think that's a factor that gets thrown in, and I think the North America needs some sports as well, and I think that gets in there too. So I don't know, all those factors. I don't know if Bobby Orr can overrule that. I think they're going to at least try it. But here's what I would say too, though. Even though the league is saying, look, one bad positive COVID test is not going to cause us to shut down but if there are multiple, it's like, I think there's a reasonable chance, or a chance anyway, that we could start up and have to shut down again if something happened. Just if we just had too many positive tests, or, if one of the cities where we're playing in starts to be overrun, or, something of that nature. So, but I think we both understand what, Bobby Orr is saying. I'm not anxious to rejoin the human race at my age. I'm kind of want to wait for I wish there was a vaccine right around the corner. So So I get it, and I understand it, and he's not alone. Like I think there are players that feel that way as well.
Well, there was a couple of interesting developments too that I noted in other sports. I mean, Blake Snell, who recently won the Cy Young Award in the American League, the Tampa Bay Rays pitcher, basically came out and said he has no interest in participating in a baseball season in the midst of this because he said he's not going to put his life in jeopardy to play baseball, and he doesn't appreciate that Major League Baseball expects him to. Now, baseball's always had, I think, the strongest players union of any of the North American sports, so I think they're going to have a big say in what happens in the major leagues. I don't know if hockey's as union is as powerful as the baseball one. The other development was, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's kind of become the voice of this epidemic, talking to Peter King about the NFL, and he said he thinks the NFL has probably the most reasonable chance to be the next sport to play because he thinks by the fall they'll have a pretty good handle on this virus. He thinks there'll be testing available for everyone by then, and it will be feasible to test players 2-3 times a week to see if they have it. And, if somebody has it, to get them out of there before they cause, a serious outbreak. So, you hear the experts saying things like that, and you wonder, I understand why people want sports back, but I just don't know if we're not pushing this too fast. I mean, it seems to be all part of this return to normalcy that just, are we really ready to return to normal? I don't think we are.
No, we're not. But I don't think that'll, we're not ready in America, but we got cities reopening, and the problem is we have divergent opinions on that. Like in Michigan, I don't even think our barbers are open yet, but would I go get my hair cut right now? I don't think so. So I'm sure not going to go to a sporting event with a large number of people. Or a movie theater, or, I'm surprised in Michigan we're and within a couple of weeks or so, they're talking about churches reopening on Sundays. And just imagine, sliding in, you got, churches are usually filled with elderly, congregationalists who show up, and, you're going to slide into pews next to each other. So I don't know. It certainly is probably we're pushing it too quickly because we do want to return to normalcy, and sports is just part of all that.
Then the first person who coughs, are 40 people going to stampede to the exit?
Yeah. I don't know. What's interesting about the baseball situation is, I would assume all the discussions here in hockey are relatively cordial because, we have a salary cap where it's an exact split of the hockey related revenue. So there's no negotiation, whatever issues we have with this, they share equally. So, there's really not much to negotiate. The NHL wants the players to be safe, and the Players Association wants their players to be safe. So the league is saying, well, what do you want us to do? Because there's no reason to fight over that. So I think it's a little bit different in baseball, where they don't have a salary cap, and they are actually arguing about how much money they should get, because initially they were talking about prorated, and now the owners are saying, well, yeah, but as it turned out, we lost even more than we thought, and we want to just split the money. Well, that sounds a lot like a cap, and the baseball players have fought against the cap for 150 years or whatever it is, but it seems like 150 years. Yeah, I mean that could fall apart because of money. Wouldn't that be funny? With everything else going on, that the baseball players don't end up playing because of financial interests, and not the fact that it seems a little dangerous, to be sure.
There was another player whose name escapes me right now, but he said he's going to be expected to play. He wants danger pay because he's putting his life on the line to go out and play baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the idea of team sports and getting together and sharing a dressing room, and I mean, do you, in baseball, do you send guys down in the bullpen, or or do you keep them 6 feet apart? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, there's so many things that we've never dealt with that they're going to have to figure out, and just so many ways it can go wrong.
Yeah,
And just
yeah. I will tell you though, it was enjoyable to talk the sport with Brian. Talk about could the Blue Jackets be that that dark horse team that could come in because they're hard to play against. They're sort of built for the postseason. I mean, Werenski and Seth Jones, is there a better defensive tandem than those two? No, I think not. Werenski had 20 goals this year. And so, yeah, and they're interesting. I think they're a fascinating team. Like, again, I repeat, I would not list them among the favorites, but nothing they would do would surprise me. Anyway, we're running we've run out of time. So as usual, it's moved along too quickly. But we appreciate you joining hockeydebates.com. We'll be back next week. Everybody stay safe.
Have a good day, everybody.